All right, people, we have got a massive, massive show for you tonight. As the thumbnail, you probably guessed, we were talking about a lot of TV shows that just premiered between last week and this week. We're also going to talk about a couple of movies that are coming out this week. We had a double release in preparation for the week before Thanksgiving. But first things first, I just wanted to introduce, we got a brand new guest host for the Talkin' TV podcast, reached out and requested it personally, friends with a lot of the previous co-hosts that I've had on this channel. First timer, Mr. Balaban of Film Toppings channel. Gal, hopefully I got your name right. What's up, dude? Happy to have you on here.
Yeah, happy to be on finally. We've had this one scheduled for quite a while actually.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to be talking about an interesting variety of movies as well as a show or two. And yeah, just really happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, dude. Like I said, any friend of Kristen, Sean, Luke's, and Yolo's is a friend of mine. So I'm absolutely happy to have you on. And we are going to talk about, we got a lot of stuff. Like I said, we got a new Hunger Games movie, somehow. We got a new Taika Waititi movie. We got 4 shows. We got The Holdovers from Alexander Payne, his first movie since 2017's Downsizing. You have the premiere of one show and 2 shows that premiered last week that are airing their second episodes this week, but we are just getting to now. So we got a lot to talk about. So without further ado, this is the latest episode of the Talkin' TV podcast. All right, what is going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Talkin' TV podcast. We are airing live on Sunday night. Like I said, I am joined by Mr. Gal Balaban. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but first things first, Gal, I mean, first time on the show, man. I mean, tell me something about yourself. Like, you know, what got you into movies? What made you decide to start podcasting? What have you been up to? You know, how did you, like, become a part of the film community? Because I feel like we know all the same people that we kind of met during COVID, but I don't know. I feel like you kind of slipped under my radar. Also, how did you find out about us? I'm interested, man.
Wow. So first of all, I got into movies. That's a really good question. I've always been into movies. I've actually been running my Film Toppings page on Instagram for almost a decade now, ever since I was 12.
Wow.
Something like that, which is wild when I tell people that. And, you know, I definitely got involved with the film Instagram community pretty naturally, and I joined the League of Cinephiles pretty early on. So that's how I met Kristen, aka Miss Filmingo, and Luke Reviews, who have been on your podcast and are old friends of Talkin' TV. And through them and through Sean Phillips, who is the great math teacher movies who we all love, I got to find you out through the story and checked out your content. And the weekly stuff you've been doing is super, super cool. So I was like, hey, why not shoot this guy a message? I got some free time.
Well, I was happy to hear it. I was happy to reach out, dude, because I'm not going to lie, I was worried because I remember back during COVID, you know, Chris was telling me about all these guys like, yeah, I keep reaching out to all these like YouTubers and everything, and they seem really excited to collaborate with us. It's cool, and like we were able to build this like really awesome community, but I just feel like, you know, once real life kicked back in, and, you know, I feel like a lot of the people that we met during that time period went away, and so I was just so grateful to be able to hold on to the connections that we still had, that we'd really made, and I just thought that the time of people actually reaching out to us to ask to be on the channel, I thought that was over, so when you reached out, I was like, oh my God, thank God, somebody is still interested in wanting to actually come on and collaborate with us that wasn't just a COVID fan. Yeah, I'm always happy to have new people on. I'm always happy to, like, you know, stop collaborating.
Sure.
And I was gonna try and do an Ice Baby reference there, but I'll stop there in order to avoid the major cringe factor. Yeah, like I said, you know, you've been doing this since you were 12. I know you recently got into what's it called? I know you recently you were able to get to Toronto Film Festival, so you saw a couple of these movies there. I know that. I myself did not get a chance to watch. I did not get a chance to go to Toronto, unfortunately, this year, me being in school, but I did get to watch a couple of movies at New York Film Festival that I covered a couple weeks ago with Kristen. So we're going to kick this off tonight. Like I said, we got a lot of stuff to cover. It's going to be another like kind of mashup medley, you know, as the studios do what they usually do in terms of the content dump. They always do this, and it really annoys me why they can't spread these movies out in the year, why they can only ever release certain of these movies between November and December. It befuddles me. But you know what? Unfortunately, Hollywood does what it does, and we as you know, mere YouTubers are forced to follow and go along. But I think in order to kick this conversation off, probably the biggest surprise is we got a new Hunger Games movie for the first time in almost a decade. It's based off of a one-off prequel novel, right? There's no sequels to this novel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, that it's based off of. it follows a formula that has repeatedly failed for both movies and TV shows in the past. The idea of a spinoff around a supporting character, not just a supporting character, but the main antagonist of the original series. You know, you've seen this tried and failed formula numerous different times. And to nobody's surprise, obviously, the movie's not going to hit at the box office because it's not a Marvel movie. And, you know, movies just are not successful at the box office anymore unless like out of random occurrence. But I think the most surprising thing for me personally is for somebody who, unlike a lot of these other franchises that the studios have been trying to keep going and milk for like the last like 10, 15 years just about, the Hunger Games had kind of like had its point, it had its moment, and it kind of went away. You know, you unfortunately had all the other like spin-offs of it that tried to reclaim its place. You know, your Divergent, your Maze Runner, they kind of came and went, and they died off pretty quickly. But Hunger Games had wrapped. It was over. It was done. So we're here, right? I believe the last Hunger Games movie, Mockingjay Part 2, came out in November or December of 2015, which is 8 years ago to this day. And so now you have this new one. You have this gigantic. I want to say that this movie was budgeted at it's probably going to be in something. It's probably going to be in something ridiculous level. But yeah, this movie is budgeted at around 100 million. It's cleared about 98.5 million so far opening weekend. So that's not awful. But this movie also, similar to the book, has a pretty open and shut ending. Like, it doesn't really set up for sequels, you know, not in the way that like the Hunger Games obviously was adapted from a trilogy, so there was always more areas for it to go. This is a one-off. So like, I guess my first question for you is, before we actually get into the movie itself and discuss our thoughts, what do you think the motivation for making this was? Like, obviously, again, it's, you know, they're trying to mine any form of IP that they can in order to like, you know, garner any sort of interest, but like, why this? You know, I guess like I'd be really curious to see your thoughts on that.
So, first of all, a bit about the Hunger Games. These were really big when they came out. The books and the movies together had like a whole decade that they were just a phenomenon. And like, you remember, they had these 3 Novembers in a row when Catching Fire and then Part 1 and Part 2 had come out. And it was this really big thing. You know, people who had read the book like me knew what was going to happen, but still it was this really epic thing. And I don't think that, you know, not all the movies were perfect. I'm not saying that, but not every franchise has the amount of world building that the Hunger Games movies successfully did. Now, I read the book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, when it came out, and I thought it was a really interesting approach to a young President Snow, a young Coriolanus Snow. I never knew it was like Coriolanus. They all have interesting names in this franchise. But I think it's also, first of all, Francis Lawrence is still part of it, and a lot of the producers and stuff. And I think they really just loved, first of all, obviously, they made a crap ton of, but they really did love probably Suzanne Collins' novel. And apparently Francis Lawrence, he regretted splitting Mockingjay because that was like the true Breaking Dawn and Deathly Hallows that they decided against splitting Songbirds and Snakes into 2 movies, which I respect, because having read the book, I don't think it would have worked as multiple movies at all.
Really? Oh, so you're telling me the original plan before they opted not to go was to split this into 2 movies?
Not that I knew of until today, but
okay.
It said that like Lawrence briefly considered it because he was concerned over the book's length.
Okay.
But
got it.
Having read the book, it's a pretty close adaptation. Basically, every big event that's covered in the book is covered in the movie. This almost the same way.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to read the book fully, but I was able to get like a pretty good synopsis as far as what it was gonna be about and what was gonna happen. And I think my biggest surprise coming out of this movie, which I will admit, again, like the Hunger Games as a whole, I'll get to the Hunger Games as a franchise and my thoughts on that, because I think my thoughts on it have kind of changed a lot in the amount of years that it's come out. Because you are right, those movies kind of were a pretty big phenomenon when they came out, and I think that, you know, when it comes to the whole splitting the whole YA adaptation that like has a pretty big impact and splits its last installment into 2 parts. Obviously Harry Potter and Twilight get a lot of like the focus for that, but the fact that Hunger Games did that as well, what's it called? I thought that was probably the most unnecessary for it. And if memory serves, I believe that it's like it was the negative reception to Mockingjay that caused a lot of the future ones. So I know Divergent originally planned to do that, and then they dropped the second half of Allegiant. Maze Runner, I know they ended up doing the third entry as one
movie.
And then obviously the famously, the Russos with Infinity War Part 1 and 2, and then renaming Infinity War Part 2 to Endgame. So you obviously saw the trickle effect out of that from Hunger Games. But I just, my biggest thing coming out of this movie was how much I enjoyed it. Like, I actually had a good time watching it. I really did. I found, even if not all of the, not all the characters were super three-dimensional, but the ones that were compelling enough. None of the acting was bad enough to really irritate me. And in fact, the good performances, like the ones that really went for it over the top, I'm thinking of two in particular. I think you know which two I'm thinking of. Were so deliciously chewing on the scenery. Like, I was just having so much fun. I've talked about this in the past where I have a big thing for actors chewing on scenery like it's a piece of meat. I just love when actors go for it like that. And yeah, as far as the whole President Snow being like the total opposite of a main character of Katniss Everdeen, there was a little bit of there's people who view this might be a little bit confused about the marketing, because the marketing is placed in Rachel Zegler pretty heavily in the forefront of the marketing, when she is not the main character of this at all. She's, if anything, she's total opposite. She's the cattle to the plot. Snow is very much so the main character of this movie, and his kind of watching his progression throughout, I think, is really interesting. I know a lot of people have been comparing him to Anakin Skywalker. I don't necessarily know if that's an accurate comparison, because unlike Anakin, who starts from a pretty innocent place and then has the fall from grace, Snow really doesn't have that. Snow's whole thing is, he's an opportunist. He goes for whatever will benefit him and his family the most. And I think that where we're kind of misled is, obviously because of the connection that he forms with Rachel Zegler's character in the beginning. But what's it called? I would say that my only major criticism of Snow's arc is I think that the shift from when from when Zegler's character wins the games to when he goes to District 12 to work as a peacekeeper, I think that shift is a little bit abrupt in terms of how he just becomes like a straight up asshole as opposed to being like a little bit more sympathetic. I feel like we needed to see a little bit more there. But other than that, I thought his arc was very compelling. I found all the supporting characters to be pretty good. The Dinklage character, what's his name? Highbottom. I couldn't tell if that name was it purposely done. But obviously, I assume that I'm not assuming that Suzanne Collins wrote that part with Dinklage in mind. But I do find that really interesting that the dwarf character in the movie is called Highbottom. I'm like, was that intentional? But but I digress.
Maybe the casting directors talk to Francis Lawrence.
If that's the case, man, I'm amazed that Dinklage let them get away with that after giving Snow White so much flack. But yeah, the rest of the supporting guys, Hunter Schafer is not in it that much, but she is good for the parts she's in it. Viola Davis and Jason Schwartzman, again, every time those two are on screen, I'm like, give me more of that, because Davis with the Frankenstein looking wig out to here and the chipped tooth and the blue eye, and just deliciously, she's just a character that knows she's evil and delights in it every second of it. Same with Schwartzman, but Schwartzman is more of like a goofy comedic character, but he knows exactly the type of character that he is and just plays into it. And he got some of the hardest laughs from the theater for sure.
Oh, Schwartzman was funny. I do think Viola Davis. Look, I'm not. Just so you know, Viola Davis is one of my favorite currently working actors.
I figured
her character, her performance really annoyed me sometimes, especially early on.
Really?
It took me a while to get used to it because I just wasn't expecting. I was like, something's off with her voice. It took me a while to get used to the fact that she was just going so over the top, not mustache twirling, but almost she's she's sort of this political advisor and the head game maker. She's like what Philip Seymour Hoffman's character Plutarch Heavensbee was 64 years before, and she's just so sadistic, and she's almost one of the main reasons that the Hunger Games is still around, even though she's not actually in political power. But yeah, she was quite a lot. Jason Schwartzman, I agree with. He was hilarious. I loved his. He's kind of doing a Stanley Tucci impression, but I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. As Stanley Tucci's ancestor, but yeah.
There's one thing where it's there's this joke that he's making to each of the different Capital students, and he keeps doing a different flip on this one joke, and it works every time. As for the movie as a whole, I think when it started, I was a little less warmer to it. Everything with the Hunger Games and most of it after, I think as a whole, it's I've warmed up to the movie a little more ever since, like it's grown on me a little ever since I saw it. I still think it's far from perfect. I think there are some parts where the dialogue feels a little soulless, or like you said, some of the characters don't feel three-dimensional, or the shifts. Like we said, Snow does something really terrible, which is the first real evil thing that he does in the movie. And I'm like, would you really do that to this individual at this moment in his life? Like that one time I didn't feel it, but you really do feel that there's like this hunger for power that that trumps everything else for him. Like he has this speech at the end. I won't say anything, but it definitely, that part does feel earned.
Yeah,
but also
absolutely.
Rachel Zegler, the Southern accent took me a bit to get used to. I overall don't mind.
I wasn't expecting that. Because I knew obviously she was going to be like making a show for the camera and all that, and doing the whole thing, right? But the Southern accent I did not know about, was not expecting.
I was like, am I hearing that right? But I don't think it's not as much her performance that bothers me. I just don't think they had much chemistry. Like Tom Blythe is pretty good. I don't think, like, I'm the biggest Rachel Zegler defender, even with like whatever she said about Snow White.
Even with the Snow White thing recently. Interesting.
Yeah, but like I don't really care about whatever she said, but it's just, I don't know. I think she was a much more interesting character in the book. Like here, she feels like there are some moments in the Hunger Games where like a tribute does something really memorable and symbolic. I'm like, why isn't it her doing that instead of like this character that, like this random character that we don't know? So I will say the scenes in the games are pretty amazing. Like the cinematography.
Agreed.
The cinematography is the best in the franchise, and the way the Hunger Games scenes were shot was incredible.
Especially, like, I think the most interesting thing about the games section in this one, besides the fact that it wasn't the final act like the games were in the first two Hunger Games movies, is because it's so much. It's set so many years before the Hunger Games movies, right? You see that like they haven't put as much thought into like the design and like making the games into like a different settings in the arena, so it's a pretty simplistic arena. But the way that they're able to make use of that, especially since with the rebel bombings that happens at the beginning, that like almost tears the arena to pieces. I think it's pretty fascinating as well, you know, how they're able to make such interesting use of it. My only question is, because like I said, I didn't actually read the book in depth, is did those drones suck in the book as much as they did in the movie? Because what the hell? Like, I have never seen drones. I mean, I understand it's pretty antiquated technology at that point, but still, like, come on, man. Like, how difficult is it to just have a drone fly in, drop something off, and then fly out? Like, why do they have to smash into a wall or something?
That's so funny. So actually, look, I read the book in 2020. That's when it came out. So I don't really remember like if the drones were a detail, but I feel like maybe they were. I feel like that would be cool if that was a detail they added in the movie, that just the drones suck ass. Which is one of the like the funniest parts.
It was just so dumb, and it didn't really serve a purpose, at least until the end. That I'm like, what was the thought process here? Was it just to like add it as a plot detail in order to like speed through the games and kill off the tributes quicker? Because like I said, this was because the games in this movie take place in the second act. It's not, so they have a whole third act to go. Yeah. So they can't really take their time, and they kind of have to rush through and just like, all right, we got to kill these kids off pretty quick. So, but I will say that. So I guess in order to like kind of tie it back to what I was saying about the Hunger Games as a whole, not just this book, is I found that when I was reading the books, I had to read the books in high school, and when the movies were coming out, I guess just because we were at a different time period, you know, in the world, and I was at a different time period in my life, you know, it was early to mid 2010, so the world wasn't in as much of a position as they were, and I didn't find it appealing, and I just didn't get it in terms of like the demographics. I'm like, I don't understand it. It's like, because like I was applying too much of like a logical sense. It's like, I don't get it. The citizens clearly know that because I was just in my mentality of, oh, good guys good, bad guys bad, and good guys fight bad guys and win, whatever. So I was like, why the citizens of Panem clearly know that they are being oppressed. Why do they need to wait and watch these people get killed in the Hunger Games to just rise up? I'm like, clearly they should have been able to put together some sort of organized rebellion by now. And what I will say is, now having sat through obviously the last 10 years and witnessing everything that's happening in the world and the massive disparities of wealth, and then understanding what happens in oppressive regime governments throughout history, as you know, typically, especially with disparate citizens, the Hunger Games as a whole just makes a lot more sense to me now, and I'm able to understand it, even if the characters themselves are a little bit, they're more so archetypes than they are like real feeling characters. the story itself makes a lot more sense to me. And I think that's why I was able to appreciate this one a lot more than I did the first couple of movies, you know? So I guess that's why I appreciated this one a little bit more. And it's even made me want to go back and rewatch the movie, which I have had up until this point no desire to go back and rewatch. So well, I will say that this movie, it's not a great movie. I didn't give it 4 stars. It's a 3.5 out of 5. I still have to admit, I was surprisingly compelled by it. Enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Again, really impressed by the performances. Again, just gorgeous looking movie too. Great production design and everything. And yeah, I very much enjoyed my time, especially considering that, like, for the most part, there's no sequel plan, so it was just nice to get a movie of this caliber, of this level of budget. I was able to go in, enjoy myself, and not really have any expectations, and not worry about it setting up for anything, and just kind of giving some new perspective on, unfortunately, let's be honest, we are a reality in which we are getting much, much closer to the Hunger Games than I ever would have thought when the books and the movies first came out. So I don't know, that might just be me and my very negative, cynical view of the world. But what are your wrap up thoughts and star ratings?
I mean, hey, we've been through a lot lately, but
yeah,
I will say, it was nice to see. I don't remember how much this was shown in the book, but we do get a glimpse of the dark days and the actual war between the capital and the districts, which is the whole reason the Hunger Games is a thing, because the capital wants to punish the districts for their rebellion, which is one of the reasons, like, the rebellion takes a while, right? Like, it takes 75 years to get together, apparently.
Right.
But so that was, like, really interesting, and I feel like, you know, as with the other movies, they did an excellent job with the scale and with the production value and just building a world. We didn't really mention him, but I thought Josh Andres Rivera actually might have delivered the most emotional performance in the movie. I think he was really great. He's also Rachel Zegler's boyfriend, IRL. Fun fact.
I was wondering, because he was also in West Side Story too. So I was wondering, I'm like, oh, there's a little connection going on there, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. He's definitely, like, connected to her other love interest in some way in both films. I saw, like, a letterbox thing about that.
Yeah, I saw a meme posted. It's like Jose Andres Rivera. It's like 2 movies about Rachel Zegler playing a lead who sings, and Jose Andres Rivera is
Josh Andres Rivera.
Josh Andres Rivera is related to her in some way. So
yeah,
I thought that was.
So I thought he did a really good job, because, like, Sejanus is obviously a very important character. He's sort of, hopefully he's like the voice of the audience. You know, hopefully we are anti-Hunger Games.
Yeah.
We would be in real life. I also thought Hunter Schafer was great. I honestly felt the movie's already more than 2.5 hours, but I thought she was pretty underused, to be honest.
I agree.
She gave the movie a lot of heart, I thought, with what she was given.
Also, apparently she shows up in the Hunger Games movies as well. I completely missed that, if that's the case.
Tigress is in Mockingjay Part 2.
Okay.
She's like a resident of the capital who sort of gives Katniss and Gale and the rest of the people shelter while they're infiltrating the city of the capital.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
she has like she has like face paint and like fake whiskers and shit. Yeah, like she actually looks like a tiger. I guess
it all makes sense now.
Yeah, I will say I did rewatch the Hunger Games movies. I think around the time this book came out, not for that reason, just cause. And I do think they are, again, you know, they're flawed films. I don't like the cinematography in the first movie at all. I think the splitting into 2 parts greatly hurts the third movie. But overall, for the world building and like that cultural impact it had when I was younger, I definitely have very fond memories of those movies. And I don't think it's a great movie, just like you. But I also do think that it's so I do think that it's like it's well put together. The like I said, the cinematography is great, and I'm so glad that they didn't like make this with any sort of like splitting or continuation in mind, that they gave the book the respect that it needed. And you know, I hope that they leave it for a while. This is a good prequel book and a good enough adaptation, but you know, I hope they still leave it for a while, because I think it would be nice if we don't have to see like more play out or like even further back, like the first ever Hunger Games. Now it's a nice
Yeah, the connections to the Hunger Games I thought were well done enough
Yeah.
that like this served its purpose well enough as a one and done, you know.
But I like how you mentioned like the whole they haven't really like by the time that they get to the Hunger Games that we see in the first two movies, it's a lot more intricate. It looks like actual woods and stuff. Here
Yeah.
it's just one like rundown arena. There aren't as many traps
Right.
and like mutts and whatever. Even as down as to like the what are they called? The peacekeepers dressing differently. They don't
Right.
have like the whatever mask,
the masks on,
the
right.
Power Ranger mask. So
Exactly.
yeah, I thought those were really great details.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then what would you give it out of 5 stars?
I'd say 3 out of 5, but like
Yeah.
let's say a high 3.
Yeah, it's a very high 3.5 for me. Like I said, I could justify giving it a 4, but yeah, very, very high 3.5 for me. So now we're gonna move on.
I'd say 3.
Yeah. So now we're gonna move on. So we're gonna talk about a movie that you actually got a chance to see at Toronto International Film Festival. This was a movie that I wasn't skeptical about. I was just surprised when I saw that it was getting released, and that's The Holdover. So this is the next movie from Alexander Payne, who is a very, very accomplished director. The last movie I saw of his obviously was his last movie to release in theaters, which is 2017's Downsizing, which is a really interesting concept that I thought just did not deliver to its full potential. And
I absolutely hate that movie. I think it's a terrible movie.
I don't hate it, but it was so weird. Like the premise itself was really interesting, but then where it went was just so weird and goofy, and I just didn't understand. Like I'm like at the end of the day, I'm like, what purpose did this serve ultimately? So I was confused by that.
I think at first I was like you, but then I saw it again, like parts of it again, because it was just playing on TV. And my brothers were like asking me what this movie was, and I just couldn't explain it to them.
Right, you're just like,
I realized this movie might be terrible.
I think the only way to explain that movie is it's like, yeah, it's literally Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but if they tried to take it seriously, and I don't know if it works. I think their problem is that they didn't actually they hinted at a lot of things that were really interesting as far as like, you know, overpopulation problems and everything, but then the shit they do at the end with the whole like, oh, we're going into the earth in order to preserve what's left of humanity, is it because turns out our experiment didn't work at all. I'm like, what the hell is going on? But anyway, so then you have the whole cancellation claim. I believe it was Rose McGowan or that leveled a Me Too claim against him, as I call it, because Alexander Payne, I remember, was originally supposed to direct The Menu. He ended up losing that movie. That went over to Adam. Yes, I remember because The Menu was such an interesting concept because of the script that Alexander Payne was originally going to direct it, and then when they lost that, it went over to Adam McKay's production company, and that's how that ended up getting produced with I
love that movie, by the way.
Mark Mylod directing. Yeah, great movie. But so I thought that like a lot of other people that got hit with Me Too suits back in 2017, I thought that Payne was done. I didn't think he was coming back. So when I saw the trailers for this, I was like, okay, I'm surprised. Another movie from Alexander Payne. Wow, I didn't think that this was going to happen. And after watching it, I purposely stayed away from advertising for it. And after watching it, I can say that, man, I am so glad that he survived being canceled, because Alexander Payne as a director is just somebody who I feel like we need right now. He really is. I mean, if you look at his body of work, he's just a guy who he always avoids the spotlight. And I feel like he's one of the guys that makes just really good movies that don't function as typical Oscar bait. You know, they're never about any of the typical Oscar baity things that they love. It's just always about, I feel like, flawed people trying to survive in trying to make it through scenarios that just don't benefit them. You know, movies like Sideways, movies like About Schmidt, Nebraska, the Descendants obviously is probably the biggest amount of, it's between the Descendants and Sideways as far as the most amount of critical acclaim. Obviously, the first movie that he made that really caught attention was Election, which is again a movie that I would be interested to see people's reaction to a movie like Election if that came out now. But
yeah,
look, like, oh wow, I have no idea if that's a movie that aged amazingly or horribly. But I think
it's aged. But you know, I'm not as big on it as a lot.
Well,
of other
I guess
people.
just because of what's so interesting about it is the fact that they make Matthew Broderick the not the sympathetic character, but the victim character in that movie, and so I think that it's incredibly fascinating that because I feel like if that movie were to come out now, it would be totally the opposite case. And like people would be like rooting for Reese somehow versus she's clearly portrayed as the villain. As an antagonistic protagonist in that movie, as I like to say. But so you have this movie, The Holdovers, and I think that in the year of 2023, where you have all these movies that are either functioning as historical finger wagging movies or basically cautionary tales. It was just nice to have a movie that was just nice, low key, sweet, down to earth, about people getting through respective trauma. It was an incredible character study. It's not necessarily the most thought provoking movie, but it doesn't need to be. What's it called? It's just about people trying to get through tough situations at a time period when, they should be connected with other people, the holidays. It's got unbelievable performances from the three leads, that being Paul Giamatti, Divine Joy Randolph, and Dominic Sessa, who is the relative newcomer who plays the young kid in the movie. If you got a chance to see this as TIFF, man, what was the reaction like coming out of seeing it there?
Oh, everyone absolutely loved it, first of all. Let me tell you how many laughs were in the crowd. I don't remember if this was the world. Okay, no. So it came to Telluride, I think a week or two before. Yeah, so like a week before it premiered at Telluride, and so this was like the second major screening of the film, and you could tell everyone was loving it. First of all, a lot of laughs, and the applause was pretty strong at the end of this movie, and the people I talked to absolutely loved it, and it was the first runner-up for the People's Choice Award at the end of the festival.
Really?
Yeah. So as for me personally, I actually think it's Alexander Payne's best movie from what I've seen.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I have not seen Nebraska though, but from what I've seen, like Sideways and The Descendants, I actually love this one the most. And I think because usually it's his writing that shines, and here he didn't write this movie. It's still a really, really, really great script. But I think his directing here takes on its own identity almost. Like it feels so grand. Like the cinematography and the colors are almost like the Fablemans from last year.
Yes.
And I think it's a mix of, I think, laugh out loud and, these characters bonding, but also, like you said, them getting through trauma. So I thought it was like a good balance between like, I guess like fun and heartbreaking, where you remember a bit of both. So I was a little like pleasantly surprised, not in a bad way, but I was a little surprised when the main takeaway was that this movie was just really warm and cozy. I was like, oh, that's cool that's what people are taking away, even though like the main character is an absolute savage and sort of like embarrassing and disliked by everyone. But that's sort of the
because it's not the first time we've gotten. It's again the tale of a curmudgeon-y, older, grouchy guy with a heart of gold that warms up to a younger figure. That's a tale as old as time, especially when it comes to movies set around the holidays. Yeah,
and Paul Giamatti, I mean, he's always been talented, but he's never been someone who I'm like, oh, that performance from Paul Giamatti is one of my favorite performances. But like here, it's one of my favorite performances of the year for sure. It is such a great, like, he's equally funny and portrays like this man who's actually really lonely and insecure, but the way the movie frames him, you can't really judge him because you just understand that like he's actually kind of warm, even though that's not the first thing you see of him. And we talked about Dominic Sessa a bit. He's really great, and he's like you can tell that he's not high school age in real life, but with a movie like this, like he's supposed to be like a 70s teenager. You can give it a pass. I thought he was also terrific because he's a kid who, he never thought he'd be spending the holidays with the most disliked teacher at his school, but then he finds sort of like a best friend in this guy, and so does Paul with him. And I really would love to see some Oscar buzz for Paul Giamatti, but also for Divine Joy Randolph.
Yes,
I thought she was absolutely terrific because first of all, she's very, I guess it's like I wouldn't say transformative necessarily, but she is like giving it a lot, and she has these moments of sadness, but she's also like, hey, get your shit together, even though she's going through something even worse, definitely even worse than these two guys.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's the rock of the movie for sure. Yeah, her performance I found to just be really motivating. I've been a big fan of her since I saw her in Dolomite Is My Name, and I've seen her in a couple of things. I know that this series obviously got a lot of flack I don't necessarily know rightfully so, but I thought that she was a standout performance in The Idol that aired over the summer.
Oh, I didn't see that, but she's great in Only Murders in the Building.
I have not got a chance to watch that yet, but yeah, I've really enjoyed her in everything she's in, and I thought that she just nailed the whole idea of just working her way through. Again, every character in this movie has got a bit of trauma that they're working through, and just how these three are able to find each other. You know, obviously Giamatti's thing is he's kind of been stuck working at the school that he went to literally for years, and kind of watched all of his peers around him move on to bigger and better things, and he's kind of just stuck in the same place. And then you realize why, because because he unfortunately took the fall for a classmate of his that cheated. And then you have the kid, Dominic Sessa, who was revealed to have, his parents have gone through a divorce. And then when you realize the reason why, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. And then with Divine Joy Randolph's character, the whole thing is her son, who attended the school, enlisted in Vietnam because he couldn't get enough funding to go to college, and then died as a result of it. So she's kind of getting over that as well. So you have all these characters that are just dealing with a lot of trauma on their hands, and are people that don't really get along with others. They're very isolated. They're very lonely. They don't have a lot of good interactions with them, and then kind of with them being forced to be together in this isolated setting, but not like a horror kind of a way. You know, they kind of respectively get to know each other more, and then bond and become better people as a result of it, you know, and then I think are all kind of able to move on, You know, Dominic Sessa's not doing so well in school, and then, at the end, he finally finds the motivation to stay in further. And then Paul Giamatti, something happens at the end where he is finally forced to leave, and he ends up, it ends up being probably the best thing for him. It's just, it's funny because a lot of people, I believe, were saying that, like, yeah, this is kind of in line of, like, there were a ton of movies that were set in boarding schools that were released in the 80s and early 90s, School Ties, Dead Poet Society. But there's one other big one that I'm forgetting, and it's ironic.
Dead Poet Society is a good comparison.
Yes,
there's a little bit of that in this movie.
There was a lot of that in this movie. Obviously, big difference between the Robin Williams and Paul Giamatti characters, respectively.
Oh, they're polar opposites.
But I found them to be a lot of similarities. And as far as Giamatti goes, you're 100% on the money. Where, again, Giamatti's that guy where you never really talk about, like, standout performances, but he's just one of those guys, again, character actor, been working forever, and it just whatever movie he's in, again, he's not at the typical leading man, but everything he's in, he just fucking nails. I think the first time I remember seeing him in was, I think it was Cinderella Man, because I watched Cinderella Man when I was in 8th grade, and I was like, yeah, Russell Crowe's good. I knew him from Gladiator, but he stole the scene, got an Oscar nomination for it, over Russell Crowe too, and everybody else in that movie as well. I believe he was the only one nominated for that movie.
He was the only one nominated for that, and I honestly think he earned it.
100%. And then I see him acting. Obviously I'd seen him progressively on and off and things throughout the years, Fred Claus and whatnot.
He's great in Love and Mercy, I will say.
So you mentioned that. So 2015, right? He pops up in 3 movies. He's got Love and Mercy, he's got Straight Outta Compton, and he's got San Andreas. And from there, he's just like really takes off. And I started noticing
doing everything. Yeah.
Ironic that he played two different music managers that were taking that were taking advantage of their respective clients.
I always make that joke. That in 2015, he did the same role twice.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Although one a lot more abrasive than the other one. But so I do find that funny. And yeah, he's just crushing and everything. And honestly, if he gets an Oscar nomination at the very least, I don't he won't win, but if he gets a nomination at the very least, I think kudos, good for him. Again, really good movie, really feel good, really warm, really fuzzy. I'll be interested to see the traction that this gets going into award season, especially given that, again, I feel like this is kind of getting a little overshadowed because of its release strategy. I'll be interested.
Really?
I'll be interested to see what if the buzz for this continues to circulate, because because I think that this has a chance of being like the coda of this year, in the sense of where, because it's so feel good and the word of mouth about it, of just being just like a really nice movie to watch that doesn't have like a really heavy political leanings or isn't super dark or messed up or twisted or anything like that. It could spread and circulate word of mouth that way, and I'm hoping that's what happened. I gave this 4.5 out of 5. It was so close to being a 5 for me. I
agree. 4.5 close to being a 5. I think it's going to be one of the essential watches of 2023.
I agree.
And I don't think there's much like dividing people about it. It's really well paced. It's 2 hours and 13 minutes, and it felt like 30 minutes shorter for me, honestly.
I
think it ends just at the right moment. It doesn't go on any longer than it needs to. And I do think it'll keep that traction, because I also think Alexander Payne, when he hits, he really hits. He got Sideways and Descendants nominated for Best Picture, and I think this one will too. Likely also for director, I feel, to be honest, and screenplay and acting. I think this will, if you have to ask me, this will hold that traction until an eventual Best Picture nomination.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially given that, like, you look at the type of movie this is, it's not like the type of big flashy movie that, like, it's not like an Oppenheimer. It's not like a Killers of the Flower Moon, which those are like kind of big, very big feeling, epic, spectacle based, even though they're not spectacle movies, but they feel spectacle based. And I feel like a lot of the time that's kind of like what the best director race has become. It's like who doesn't direct the best movie, who makes like the biggest movie possible.
I do think there's a bit of spectacle to the way Alexander Payne makes this movie, though, which I didn't feel in his others, but I really loved the way, just the cinematography and the way he like framed this setting. I thought there was something grand to it, even though, like you said, it's not some Oppenheimer level, like a epic.
Right. I guess it's interesting that you bring that up, because I agree. The cinematography and the editing, the way they work together, it felt like a 70s set movie, which is interesting, which, again, in the context of 2023, makes that feel a lot more epic, because, again, I've watched so many movies from the 70s for the first time this year, and I'm like, you want to talk about not making movies like they used to. Those movies, again, the amount of character that they're able to put into each frame of those 70s movies. Like, for example, I just watched The French Connection recently, and I'm like, oh my God, like that movie is an hour and 44 minutes, and it is, again, just a cops and robbers movie, and it is so damn compelling and rich and fulfilled. That car chase scene in the movie,
the car chase is wild,
which freaking shot without permits, is absolutely insane. It's one of the most compelling things I've ever
I love
seen.
That.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. Like, you watch that,
the fact that
it's just him holding the camera, following the other car. They're going around New York. They don't have permits at all. You see how much shit.
They have no permits. That's insane.
Crazy. It's one of the most insane. It's one of the most insane film stories I've ever seen. But yeah, Holdovers was great. So now we're moving on to we're gonna do a little bit of TV next, and we're gonna wrap it up with Next Goal Wins. Taika Waititi's next movie that he's got that just released. Which, oh man, there are so many stories that I could that we got to talk about with that one. But first, let's do some TV. First things first. Going to talk about, we got a returning show of ours that I did not think we were going to get back this year. I thought that because of the strikes and everything, and because of how long the production was going to take, I thought this was going to get delayed to next year. It did not. We finally got a release date for it. Mine, Chris's, and now Luke's, actually, one of our favorite Apple TV Plus shows, one of the shows that got us really hooked into the service when it first came out. We had Morning Show, we had Ted Lasso, we had Physical. Later on, we got Severance, and we had For All Mankind, which is a show that we've talked about several times on the show before. So we're not going to spend too much time on it, especially since we've only had one episode that dropped so far. But this is a show that, again, we've talked about it before, alternative history show that covers what if, the what if possibility of what if Russia beat the U.S. to the moon. Moon landing back in the 60s and kind of the fallout that results of it. And then it's subsequently each season is hopped forward a decade in order to show like the differences in technology advancement and everything. And we ended last season 3, which capped off in the 90s with they have officially settled on Mars, and the construction of the Mars colony had begun. But unfortunately, back on Earth, it was revealed that Gordo and Tracy's younger son who had joined that faux terrorist cell that blew up NASA facility and got Ed's wife killed. So we jump forward now a decade in the premiere of season 4, Glasnost. We are now in 2004, I want to say. We are what's it called? The Mars colony has officially been fully built out. Ed has been up there. Joel Kinnaman's character has been up there for about 7 years now. He's now a very old man. Margot's character has officially settled in Russia. You got a couple of new characters in there as well. NASA's now being run by Daniel Stern's character. You also have Toby Kebbell
in this show.
Yep, Daniel Stern is in this show, and you also have Toby Kebbell as well, playing a miner who's fallen on hard times, who is trying to go to the moon in order to make some money for his family, and ends up opting to go to Mars instead. So you've got a lot of interesting stuff that's happened in the show as a result. The Cold War ended a full decade earlier. You have obviously the fall. You have Al Gore actually as president beating out Bush in the 2001 election. You've got again, like just the way that the system is radically right. You have the way the system is radically changed. I just always find this show as a companion piece of what's happened in real life, especially since this is fulfilling the original showrunner's vision of they wanted this to be like a 7-season long show. Each season was going to cut forward a decade in order to show like the advancements in technology and the similarities, the things that stay the same versus the things that change. Obviously you have the Dev Isa character, the Edie Gathegi character that was introduced last season as the Elon Musk stand-in. The guy who is like independent capitalist space travel outside of the bureaucrats at NASA. And again, the show never ceases to amaze me in terms of just its look. It is one of the most cinematic looking shows that you have. Its attention to detail, as far as how it as far as how it captures certain historical events, and it never forgets its characters and all the things that they go through. You have certain characters that have been here since the beginning. You have certain characters that kind of come in and out depending on the time hops and everything. You have some hints, obviously, as far as what happened with some problematic characters that they cut from last season, who they seem to be building up. The performances from the cast are also rock solid. The returning players, Joel Kinnaman as Ed, Ren Schmidt as Margot, Chris Marshall as Danielle, Coral Pena as Alita, and then, like I said, the new performances, Daniel Stern, Toby Kebbell's characters as well. There's a couple of other new guys as well. Gal, have you gotten a chance to watch the show at all? Do you know anything about it?
I haven't, but I've seen the trailers. It does look really interesting, but at this point, if it's at season 4, I don't think I'll get far.
I will say our good friend Luke of Luke Reviews, who was supposed to be on this episode, also started it pretty late, and he was texting me a lot over the last couple of days being like, oh my God, why did it take me so long to get to this show? This show is absolutely phenomenal. He crushed like all 3 seasons in like a week. So I would say that if there was a show to get into just in order to binge, I would definitely recommend this as far as this being the show to watch, for sure.
Got it.
So, like I said, not going to spend too much time on that. I just wanted to give that a brief shout out because it is a very, very interesting show. What's it called? And I think it's worth watching. Luke and I will probably pivot back to it in the next couple of weeks once the show is wrapped. It is currently airing. It has aired its 2nd episode this past Friday. Now we're going to pivot over to 2 other shows that, one of which you have gotten a chance to see, one of which you have not. This one I'm going to pick your brain about viewing. So The Curse. So this is a show that I have heard a lot about over the last couple of years. I think I first heard about the show back in 2019. It was a collaboration effort between Nathan Fielder, Emma Stone, and Benny Safdie. I knew who Benny Safdie was. Obviously, I know who Emma Stone is. I was not aware of who Nathan Fielder was back in 2019. And obviously, with his recent efforts like The Rehearsal and Nathan For You and everything, I watched a couple of episodes of those 2 shows, and I have to say that Fielder's style and everything that he's going for, I wasn't a fan of it. I didn't get the whole, it's like the whole fixer-upper HGTV. We're going to come in and fix this store, but like not. And it's like, oh, it's a parody. But I'm like, I didn't understand how it was funny. I didn't understand the dryness of it. And so going into this show, obviously, I was a little bit skeptical. First, that it was even going to be released. And secondly, that, what purpose it was even going to serve. And after watching the first episode last week, I find it very, very interesting. It's commentary on these types of shows. It's commentary on, kind of the exploitative nature of these types of shows. But it also felt like a subtle commentary on Fielder himself, because Fielder has hosted several of these shows before. And now you have a show that is almost entirely about these types of characters having to grapple with the consequences of these shows, where you have Fielder and Emma Stone, who are like a husband-wife pairing who host this sort of HGTV-esque fixer-upper show. And basically but it shows like kind of the behind the scenes of it, where again, it's like they don't really care about the people who they're helping. They kind of come in just in order to make a big quick buck in order to make themselves look really nice. And they show that like the people who they're helping, quote unquote, are not really being helped. And it's really fascinating how you have this little girl who Fielder has a really interesting interaction with, where he's trying to be shown to be doing a good thing without actually doing a good thing, where again, he's trying to buy some Gatorade from her, but he's only got $100 on her, but obviously he doesn't want to give her a full $100, and he's trying to give her 20 as an ATM, and then he asks for change, and she curses him and everything. I found it to be really, really fascinating. I don't know if I loved it but it's one of those things where it's so compelling that I'm I wanted to see where it went. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. What were your thoughts on this episode, but just on Nathan Fielder as a personality in general and everything. And obviously, again, just the fact that Fielder and Safdie, I feel are 2 totally opposite types of creatives, but I feel in a weird way they were kind of bound to be together, because it's just 2 people that specialize in making people uncomfortable with what they do.
Yeah. So I've seen the whole thing. I've seen the whole series. I saw an early screener of it before even the first episode dropped, and I gotta say the first episode is interesting. I think especially the beginning, the parody nature of it, the HGTV satire. I think it's a brilliant concept, but I think it's a better concept than it is an actual series, because a lot of the cringe humor, I don't think it managed to sustain a full 10-episode long series plot for me. It's a lot of just like different cringe situations like coming together and whatnot. And I didn't feel like it always made me laugh as much as it thought it was. I do think it really interestingly explores the idea of performative activism, which is, they're on TV, they're all happy, and they're flipping this poor community of Española, New Mexico around by giving these poor Latino citizens jobs. But what are they actually doing behind the scenes? Who are they associating themselves with? I think Emma Stone is fantastic. And I think Benny Safdie is absolutely hilarious. I actually didn't know who Nathan Fielder was until I started this show, which I don't know what that says about. I don't know. I just never saw anything with him in it. But I do think his delivery is a bit. Sometimes the cringe is a little much, and I think it's a little intentional because characters, even all the characters in the movie, think that he sucks and he's supposed to be unlikable. But I don't know, like something about his performance didn't make me like laugh or entertain as much as he thought I was, I think.
Sorry, so I just like washed down the crackers that I've just been eating. Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about Fielder specifically in this is the first time, at least that I've seen, that he's had to actually play a character. Because the thing about the rehearsal and Nathan For You is he's doing the whole like fictionalized, like, coming in and like messing with people and like, helping them out with their businesses, but then really just not doing that. And just like, again, his whole that like the whole like messing around and the whole exploring the idea of like criticizing the whole idea of performative activism has been his whole shtick. So it's definitely something that he's familiar with. And I find it really fascinating that he's decided to do that from a more heavily fictionalized narrative perspective, as opposed to the pseudo documentary esque things that he's been doing up until this point. I think that where he's kind of stuck and kind of like what's so confusing about him is, like I said, this is the first time where he's actually had to, for lack of a better word, act, which I know doesn't really make sense because all of the things that he does is technically a performance, right? But I think the difference is that because he's not doing like a fictionalized take of himself, he has to actually play a character. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect because Emma Stone is clearly playing a character. Benny Safdie is clearly playing a character. Nathan Fielder, I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect of people being confused. It's like, okay, isn't that just, or at least the people who know him, I should say, just being like, okay, isn't that just Nathan Fielder? I feel like the people who, I'd be interested to see what the perspective is from the people who are not as familiar with him and in his work. So I find it really interesting, you saying that. I do find it really interesting you saying that since, what's it called? Well, I do find it really interesting you saying that since since you were not as familiar with him beforehand. I do find that really, really, really interesting because everybody that I have, because everybody that I know that like loves Nathan Fielder and is a fan of him and is a fan of his stuff really, really enjoys his work on here, but I do find it interesting your thoughts, because I didn't know that you'd actually watched all 10 episodes originally. I do find it really interesting that what's it called? I in terms of like my interest going through the rest of the show is I was not sure whether or not this was going to be something where like, okay, like where is the story going to go? Because if each episode is just going to be like a different fixer-upper thing that just goes badly, and in terms of like, that would work for like a couple episodes, but in terms of building to an overall narrative thrust, you're right. I don't necessarily see.
I don't feel like it is sort of an overarching story. Like there's a couple characters that are, the same throughout. Like Barkhad Abdi's character is important, or I don't know the actress's name, but there's like Emma Stone's friend who is like a Native American artist. There's a couple principal characters throughout the whole show. It's not like a different fixer-upper thing, but I didn't feel like there was as much, what did you say, narrative drive, I guess?
Yeah, like, narrative thrust, narrative drive.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. I felt like there was a bit of a lack of that.
Yeah, and also, like, so as far as the whole character arc of Nathan Fielder's character, whose name I'm totally
Asher.
forget Asher. Exactly. Is the whole thing is it's like they're clearly touching on the fact that he's clearly extremely insecure about his masculinity, given the whole micro penis discussion interaction that he has with Corbin Burnson's character, which that whole scene in the first episode, I was like,
it's funny.
What are we doing here? Like I didn't understand. I'm like, or is that like, I'm like, okay, I get what this is serving narratively, but like, I don't understand if this is supposed to be like humorous or dramatic or something.
I actually thought that was a little funny, but I totally get it. It's a lot of stuff like that, but less memorable.
It just kind of came out of nowhere, and I get it. It's the pilot, but like I was just like, okay. Now, as far as like this being on Showtime, I do find it interesting because I am appreciative of the fact that Showtime is finally taking some risks with its shows and going in different directions, because I feel like Showtime's model for the longest time was take a pretty neat, good premise and just run it into the ground. You know, Dexter went on way too long. Shameless went on way too
Billions
long.
Is like it's
Billions,
parody to that.
Like, oh my, Billions, which to me, I tried watching one episode. It barely functions as like a parody of Succession. Like,
I haven't seen it. I just know that like Succession, they were asking like, how long do you guys were going for? And they jokingly said like, we're not Billions. We're gonna end it soon when it's right.
The being that Billions predates Succession, because I believe Billions was 2016 and Succession was 2018. It's just, you know what it is? Like every time I watch those shows, I'm like, yeah, those are shows that like my parents would love, and I would just cringe at because the writing, I can't handle the writing of it. You know, it's to me that is the definition of writers trying to make characters that like just speak thoughts instead of like talking like regular human beings. You know.
Are we talking about Billions or Succession?
Well, I'm talking Billions, but I'm talking about Showtime shows in general, because I found that to be the case. Like,
I hope you're not doing duking on the writing of Succession.
No. Come on, I would never. Come on, I would like
my favorite show.
I would like to think that you know me well enough to know that I have praised the writing.
Just making sure. You seem like a bright fella who likes Succession as well.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I guess in terms of like between this and Yellow Jackets, it seems to show that Showtime is actually like taking a little bit more of an interest in pursuing like really interesting and different and experimental types of original material. And so I am still interested to see where this goes in the future, even if it doesn't necessarily hit the narrative thrusts that it should. So, out of 10, so you've seen the entire season, so you'll be able to grade this on a little bit of it differently. But out of 5, I would say I give this first episode probably a solid 4 out of 5. It's a solid 4 out of 5. Again, I don't really know where it's going yet, and I don't want to know where it's going. And it was just different and interesting enough that I am compelled. I don't flat out love this show after the pilot, but I am interested to see where it goes. What about you?
Okay, I just want to clarify, I'm in the minority here. Most of the other critics who've gone as far as I have in the show actually gave it really good ratings. It has 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Personally, I didn't grasp onto the idea throughout 10 episodes. I think it could have been like a 90-minute or 2-hour movie. I think it could have been an SNL skit. For me, I think like when I watched the first 2 episodes, I was like 3.5 or 3. When I got to the end, I was like 2.5 more or 3, something like that.
Yeah, got it. Interesting. I will be interested to see what the thought process is going forward. So that is our thoughts on The Curse. Now, moving on to so this is one of the drops that dropped this weekend. And this is honestly, I watched the first 2 episodes. This is a show that when I first heard the concept, I was like, I'm interested to see why they're doing this. I'd be interested to hear what the thought process behind this is. But as far as it existing and me looking forward to it, absolutely. Give me as much of this stuff as I can. Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, the Apple TV Plus spinoff / prequel / fill in the gap show for the Monsterverse, as they have aptly titled it now. That being, of course, Warner Brothers and Legendary's collaboration with the American versions of Godzilla and King Kong, subsequently, that they have done over the last couple of years. The movie series comprising of 2014's Godzilla, 2017's Kong Skull Island, 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, and most recently 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong. There was a sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong that's set to be released next year with the subtitle The New Empire. And when I first heard about the show, I was curious. I wasn't against it at all, because I've actually been rewatching some of the Monsterverse movies, and those are also movies that I've gone from really loving them to being certainly lukewarm on others. Yeah. But in terms of just delivering on just giant monster action that just looks amazing, that finally has a budget. I was talking to my brother earlier today, and he literally says, it's like, I don't have very high expectations of these movies, because when you watch them, it's like getting big budget versions of Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus. You know exactly what you're getting. when you go into it. And for the most part, I would agree. I think the first one, 2014, 2014's Godzilla tried to take a little bit more of a serious edge with it, because that one I feel like is very so much less about the monster action, more about like building a story. And I feel like that kind of like fell by the wayside as more events came on, particularly the last.
Godzilla vs. Kong is the opposite. Godzilla vs. Kong is like a WWE movie.
Literally, it's a WWE match where you're setting up these two monsters to literally fight, and it's great. The dialogue is absolutely terrible, and it doesn't matter because the visuals and fight sequences are absolutely spectacular. I'd be inclined to say a little bit of the same thing about King of the Monsters. I remember I was really harsh on King of the Monsters when that first came out, and when I watched it recently, I'm like, this is just a stupid Roland Emmerich-esque idiot, stupid people that don't know any better than to mess with nature, running from place to place.
King of the Monsters, the script sucks ass, but the visuals are way better than Godzilla vs. Kong.
They're amazing. The creature designs and everything. I just watched it recently. It's absolutely phenomenal. So I guess when I saw this series, I was interested. I'm like, these movies are already doing pretty well. I'm not saying no to it, but why, I guess, are they doing a TV show for it? And I am, needless to say, I'm very glad that they did it, because we basically took these two guys. You got Chris Black and Matt Fraction that are the two showrunners for this. Matt Fraction being a comic book writer. He wrote famously the very highly praised Hawkeye miniseries that came out a couple of years ago, and Chris Black, who has been a showrunner for a couple of different big things. So you have these two, they're doing it for Apple. And essentially what these two decided to say was, okay, what if we did an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. esque show about Monarch, right? The organization that we know in these movies studies and keeps track of all the Titans. That would serve as a prequel / fill in the gaps for these, because they're basically the premise of the show is that you have two separate storylines, right? You have one storyline that is set prior to about 20 years before the events of Kong in the 50s, which follows basically the first couple of people that are founding Monarch. You have the younger version of John Goodman's character, Bill Randa from Kong, played by Anders Holm of the Workaholics trio, along with Wyatt Russell's character, who is a completely new and original character. So you have that, and then you have the present day, which is set in 2015, 1 year after the events of the first Godzilla, which is where you are following Randa's descendants as they're trying to figure out what happened to their dad, who they don't tell you exactly what happened, but you presume that that it was something involved with Monarch as to why he went down, as to why he died. And essentially what they did is they essentially solved the problems, the major criticisms of all the movies, which are the biggest criticisms that everybody said about the movies are, again, all the monster stuff is great, but the human stuff is crap. The human characters suck. They're one-dimensional. They just say snappy, stupid one-liners. The scripts are garbage. And even though they get a lot of good actors, again, this is a franchise that has started the likes of Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ken Watanabe, Vera Farmiga, Kyle Chandler, John Goodman, Lance Reddick popped up in these movies, Samuel L. Jackson, Tom Hiddleston, Brie Larson, Rebecca Hall, Alexander Skarsgård, Damian Bashir, Millie Bobby Brown, Brian Tyree Henry. The list goes on and on. They've got Dan Stevens in the next one coming out. They have had a massive amount of really good actors. They've
probably the only really memorable human character for the Monsterverse was Brian
Cranston's character. Brian Tyree Henry. I was going to say Bryan Cranston for the first one, but everybody knows
Cranston is he's good, he's great, but he's I think in terms of entertaining, the ones that are supposed to be comedic relief, Brian Tyree Henry is the only one that really stands out.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, well, the biggest thing that I remember this from when the first movie came out, I remember really liking that first movie, but I agree with this criticism, which is that Bryan Cranston is the most compelling character, and they kill him off in the first act. It's and focus on Aaron Taylor Johnson, who gives, for an actor who I love Aaron Taylor Johnson, gives probably one of the worst performances I've ever seen from him. He's just so boring and flat and stale, and gives the same reaction to everything, like when he first encounters Godzilla and everything. I don't understand what the purpose of his character is. It's also, this has nothing to do with his performance. I found it really weird that him and Elizabeth Olsen are playing husband and wife in that movie, and then 1 year later they're playing siblings in Age of Ultron. Really confusing. Don't know how that happened. Don't want to know why that happened. But I will say that the interesting thing about Monarch is it finally does the thing that everybody criticized the Marvel movies for so long, which is, again, we see all of this carnage caused by all these superheroes, or in this case, the monsters, the Titans, and we hear about and see all the casualties, obviously, that are lost. But this is the first instance where we actually get to see it up close and personal, from the perspective, in this show, we get, obviously, the main character, Anna Sawai's character, who is Randa's granddaughter. We get an up close, a flashback, right, of her on the San Francisco, on the Golden Gate Bridge, obviously, when Godzilla breaks through it in the first Godzilla movie. And you see, it's pretty traumatic up close and personal.
King of the Monsters started the same way.
Right, but it's not the same. But the difference is that, I feel like with King of the Monsters it's there's just something that's not nearly as compelling, because the biggest difference to me between King of the Monsters and this, King of the Monsters, you know, the characters that you see die in really corny, ridiculous, and like all the characters that die, with the exception of Vera Farmiga at the end, like Sally Hawkins' death in that movie is almost played for laughs. And Ken Watanabe's character, he gets like the sacrifice play, so you're sad, but you're also rooting for him. The thing about these characters is it feels like almost like you're at 9/11 and you're witnessing it in real time. And like the deaths are scary and they're traumatic. Like you literally see this main character, she's on a bus that is like hanging off the edge of the bridge when Godzilla goes right through it, and Godzilla gets hit with like a missile and his head goes down and he's like facing her right there and he's like roaring right at her. And the way that the sound design is done, it's impeccably done. And she's trying to help these kids get off the bus, but she doesn't get them off in time, and then the bus goes over the edge and you watch a whole bunch of kids just die right there. Like this show is not afraid to show, like, you know, character deaths and traumas. The first episode ends with the character getting ripped apart by a bunch of like micro titans and everything. It's crazy like how in-depth this show gets. And in terms of like I don't even know how to describe the show. I guess the best way that I can describe it elevator pitch wise is that it's an X-Files-esque conspiracy thriller that also happens to feature Godzilla and some of the other Titans. You know, we haven't gotten a whole lot of Godzilla yet outside of the flashback, right? Which, like I said, it's a sequence that we've already seen, but in a movie, but from a different perspective. But just after watching these first 2 episodes, I am very, very interested and very compelled to see what happens next. What's also interesting is, so I mentioned Wyatt Russell's character, who plays in the flashback. One of the interesting things that they played in the marketing is Kurt Russell, right? Famously, Wyatt Russell's father plays the older version of Wyatt Russell's character, who the characters in the main timeline, in the 2015 timeline, end up encountering. And he kind of helps them out with their journey as they are pursued by Monarch and are going and trying to figure out, because you have these 2 characters who both discover that they had the same father, that being that both discover that they had the same father and are now attempting to figure out what happened to him. And obviously that brings them into contact with Kurt Russell's character. And it's really interesting. It's really compelling. I'm absolutely ecstatic to see. When I saw that this show was going to Apple, I'm like, okay, Apple's going to give this show the correct, proper treatment. And like I said, I love Godzilla. I love giant monsters blowing stuff up. And I love that we're actually getting that, but also with a really interesting and compelling character drama. Because again, they write these characters really well. And they make you actually, like, they make them living, breathing. They make them have their own conflicts outside of all the Titans nonsense, but it ties in with the Titans in a really interesting and compelling way. And like I said, the fact that this is the first show that doesn't hold back in terms of actually showing, you know, characters suffering the consequences of their actions in terms of what happens when you get too close to these Titans, it's really compelling. And I could not recommend it more. I was really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. You mentioned also to me that you were gonna wait until the entirety of the show drops opposed to binging it. So I just wanted to know. So yeah, I find that really interesting, because like in terms of like people's television viewing habits, I know that I kind of get a little bit tired of the binge model. I prefer episodes to drop week to week. I just find it to be so much more palatable, especially in terms of the amount of content that we get, in terms of keeping up with it. But you're somebody who prefers to binge stuff, so just go in a little bit more. Also, just like what your overall connection is with the Monsterverse and everything, and like what your overall anticipation of the show going in was.
Yeah, so I haven't started it yet. I'll get to it once it's all out. I personally have just never seen the point. I don't think, I know that's how TV started, but when it's a streaming service, I don't see the point of like not releasing it so close together. I'm just used to being able to watch like one season as like one story, and like I still do pace myself. I don't like binge whole on. I like watch one episode a day, but it's nice to have that more consistency, because if I just watch an hour of something a week across 8 weeks, then it's like maybe I'll forget things, or I guess I'll like, okay, when is this gonna? I've been with this for a while now. It's something like that. So I just, especially, I don't know, when I heard this was announced, I don't think Godzilla was. I mean, you've seen it, so maybe this is wrong, but I don't know if like Godzilla. The only reason it was ever exciting for me was because it was a movie, because it was like a theatrical experience. Because like, so I was like, okay, a Godzilla show, but and I also don't think like how exciting can interquels be, like set after Godzilla but before King of the Monsters? Like it seems like an interesting concept. I feel like it could have been more interesting if they said it like right after Kong Skull Island, like in the 70s or something. So because you kind of know that it's like, okay, the world's not going to end because he has to fight King Ghidorah in 5 years or something. But I haven't started, so I'll give it a shot because I like the Monsterverse. None of the movies are perfect. They're all pretty dumb. I enjoyed the first one quite a bit. I enjoyed Kong Skull Island, even though it had no interesting characters. I enjoyed King of the Monsters for the visuals, even though the script and the story was not good. Godzilla versus Kong. I mean, it was like it wasn't a good movie at all.
But you got exactly what you were pitched.
It was exactly what we wanted, I guess. But it wasn't. It was objectively not a good movie. So, but with that said, I do think the Monsterverse is what it needs to be like entertaining in that sense. But I don't understand why we need this and Godzilla, Kong, the New Empire so close together. It's like,
yeah, I absolutely see where you're coming from, and weird. I guess just my thought process there is what's it called? Is the fact that, again, I love Godzilla and I love that series, and I love kind of how that series is kind of able to been, in a way, the only other working cinematic universe outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Everything else that tried failed miserably, and that's kind of the only one that made it work, and how they were able to like kind of craft it and make it work, I found to be really interesting and compelling. And just as far as this is something that I was already excited for. The fact that it surpassed my expectations so far, as being like, because you're right, you kind of do wonder going into this, how are they going to make what is traditionally been a pretty visually spectacular feast for the eyes work as like more of an intimate character drama? And I gotta say, they made it work. I don't know how, but they made it work.
Yeah, that's like interesting that you say that, because if it was like a different thing, if it was really just about Monarch and these characters, and like a 50s storyline, which sounds kind of cool, I feel like that's an interesting idea. But it seems like from the trailer that they're just going for the same, Godzilla fan service spectacle. He's like invading San Francisco. Not he's invading, but you know what I mean. Like he's rampaging the streets of San Francisco. I don't know. I'll give it a chance when.
Trust me, I'm telling you, it is much more so like the first thing that you were talking about than the second one, because so far, other than the flashback to the 2014 movie, which we've already seen, and them like really, again, using that for a very specific storytelling purpose, it is much more so, again, a conspiracy level show that happens to feature monsters rather than just having another monster stomping show.
Hey, you're the one who's seen it, so I'll take your advice.
Yes,
I'll go in with an open mind. The reviews seem to really like it too.
Yes,
and I'm like, I'd obviously prefer it to be good, so I'm hoping to like it once I watch it.
Absolutely, yeah. I will be in touch, obviously, and I will definitely, and I will definitely be interested to hear your thoughts once we, once we finish. I gave it a strong 4.5 out of 5. I really, really like these first two episodes.
Okay.
And now we're moving on to our last thing of the night before we wrap it up for the night. Gull, it's been a blast having you on. I've again really enjoyed, really good conversation so far. So now we move on to a director that went from being, again, this has just happened so close, so often when you fly too close to the sun. You fly too close to the sun, you get a little burned, and you got to come back down to earth. Taika Waititi, a director who at one point everybody thought was going to be Hollywood's next golden boy. He was killing it. When obviously he got the big Marvel deal, made Thor Ragnarok, which at the time everybody loved, won an Academy Award for his next movie, Jojo Rabbit. His show, What We Do in the Shadows, got his movie What We Do in the Shadows got a TV adaptation that is now just wrapped its 5th season and is going into its 6th season. He has co-executive produced
caught up on that.
And produced several different other shows. Reservation Dogs,
Our Flag Means Death.
Wrapped up. Our Flag Means Death. So this guy has been killing it. And then obviously
I gotta watch Reservation Dogs.
Yeah, fantastic show. Show. And then a show that and then obviously quickly somehow lost all of his goodwill with last summer's Thor Love and Thunder. And so his next movie, Next Goal Wins, was really supposed to come out last year, was one of those movies that just kept getting delayed, being Next Goal Wins, which is a movie that when I heard the premise, I literally was like, oh, it's Ted Lasso, but set in, but Samoan, Peloponnesian. I forget which region of the world. Samoan, yeah. So I'm like, okay, so it's just going to be that, But the biggest reason why I was interested in it is because this is, as we talked about last week on the Killer episode, it's the return of Michael Fassbender. We got back-to-back Michael Fassbender for the first time in almost 5 years since Dark Phoenix, I believe, was the last thing I saw him in. And
really?
So that was working with, pretty sure that was the last thing he was in. He hasn't worked for the last.
Yeah, you're right. Oh my God.
Yeah. So obviously you had him working with Fincher last week, which again, how that collaboration only happened last week, I was amazed, and I'm like, this is a collaboration that should have happened like years before. And now he's working with Taika Waititi, which again was a pairing that I would never in a million years have expected. So unfortunately, I have only gotten to see the first 10 minutes of this movie. I have not actually gotten to watch it yet. I planned on finishing it once we were done with the podcast, but I wanted to get your thoughts. What are your thoughts on Next Goal Wins as a movie? Because it was getting pretty, some of them, I didn't get a chance to see a lot of the reviews. Some of them were lukewarm. Some of them were praising it. I feel like Taika has been pretty hit or miss recently just as director. Outside, again, people lambasted him over Love and Thunder. I didn't necessarily hate Love and Thunder because I feel like just the Marvel brand itself had already been tarnished enough that by the time that came out, I'm like, it's fine. I enjoyed it more than Ragnarok. I thought it was more tonally consistent than Ragnarok.
Really?
I think Taika's sense of humor to me is very, very hit or miss. I like when he goes sincere because he knows how to do sincere really well. I feel like when he gets too goofy, Taika, I feel like is one of those guys that thinks he's a lot funnier than he actually is. And I feel like a lot of the jokes are really, really hit or miss for me and his stuff.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say you can like go off in the comments, whoever's watching. I think, in my personal opinion, people overreacted when it comes to Thor: Love and Thunder. It's a perfectly enjoyable action comedy. It's definitely not higher up than most of Marvel's Phase 3 or some of the other Phase 4 movies, but it's watchable. I laughed. It's all right. It didn't make me hate Taika Waititi like some people. I think he's a very funny guy. It does seem like some people think he's fallen off, particularly with this movie. The reviews are very mixed, which I didn't know going into the movie. And I actually really liked it. This is the opposite of The Curse, where I disagree with the critics, but I like this movie a lot. I had a really fun time with it. I also saw it at TIFF. From what I could tell, everyone was laughing a lot with this movie. You know, it's a film festival screening, but from the people that I did talk to, I heard some positive reception, even though the critics who saw it there already were incredibly, like you said, hit or miss on the humor. And some people, I personally loved Michael Fassbender's casting. Some people were not as big on it. They thought he was more fit for drama. I actually think the casting of a more like a guy who's known more for drama actually really elevated the movie. And you said that this looked like Samoan Ted Lasso. It's exactly that. I'm not gonna say, oh, but it's different or something. Like, it's Samoan Ted Lasso. But we talk about Ted Lasso, we talk about a very wholesome show. And I think Next Goal Wins wears its heart on its sleeve in a very similar way. But it's also got some really funny moments, some good physical comedy, some good dialogue. Michael Fassbender's character is incredibly cynical and incredibly, like, not deadpan, but he's like very pissed off all the time and impatient, which, you know, is funny. There are instances where he's a little less relatable or tolerable, but I thought he overall gave a really good comedic performance. And it's also just a great tribute to Samoan culture and shows Taika Waititi's love for indigenous people. I thought the rest of the cast was very good. Also, there's an actress who is playing a character named Jaya, who in real life was the first transgender athlete to play in a World Cup game. So I think it's got this great underdog energy that shows, you know, the worst team in like national soccer / football that never scored a goal. They just wanted to score a goal. And this culture that they embrace that helps them get through hard times, and this community that they have. And I personally didn't find it like to fall into any white saviorism traps. You know, I thought overall, you know, he is their coach, but he's not like the thing that saves them necessarily. He's just a part of their journey, and it's also based on a documentary on the true story. So, like I said, critics weren't crazy about it. I wonder if they like that one a lot more. But I personally actually really enjoyed it. I had a fun time with this comedy. I think whatever you think, you'll at least really laugh with it. But, you know, similar to his other movies, he does, you know, shoot for a lot of humor. It's even more, you know, Jojo Rabbit, like, that movie's very funny, but it's also about a very heavy subject. This movie's just, you know, it's touching, but it's just like a lot of comedy and warmth to it. So, you know, I'd suggest you give it a watch personally. I personally really liked it. And honestly, the critic reviews haven't swayed me that way. I still think it's a great movie.
Yeah, I was gonna watch it regardless because it seemed interesting, and like my whole thing is outside of the big blockbuster stuff. I feel like Taika was already an interesting enough director to begin with. Like I was really fascinated by his stuff and by his style of humor. And again, it's unfortunately another one of those things where again, just another director that kind of got swept up in the big budget Marvel machine, which I find has been hurting a lot of directors a lot more than helping them. And I truly, out of all those guys that have come out of it, I really think the only two that have really benefited from it are James Gunn and Ryan Coogler. I think that every other director has kind of been hurt by that. And but I wanted to see, because Taika has been working so hard on getting so many other projects in between his big blockbusters off the ground. Obviously again, he used his goodwill that he got from Ragnarok very, 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 very intelligently. Obviously, like I said, navigated his way.
Yeah, he shot this movie before Love and Thunder.
But yeah, like I said, it was originally supposed to come out last year. It kept getting delayed over and over again. It was first supposed to come out in April, then they pushed it to the summer, then they pushed it to November, and it finally got released. It felt like this was one of those movies that was just like that it was like expected, like dead on arrival. But I'm glad to see that it's getting a little bit of reaction. I'm glad to see that Taika still got a little bit of love, because again, like I said, my whole thing is I'm like, he's not quite super hit or miss for me. Like his misses haven't entirely missed for me. I guess just because Ragnarok was just so something I just wasn't expecting to begin with. And I still go back and forth all the time on that movie, as far as like the good parts are really good, but not all the humor works for me. I still think that as far as his funniest movie, that's still What We Do in the Shadows, because that movie just perfectly understands its source material so well and just captures like that kind of deadpan humor expression.
Yeah, that's a really great movie, and I think the show is really funny too. It's a well-deserved adaptation, but I am not caught up with it. I think it overstayed its welcome a little bit.
Absolutely. Could not agree more with that. It definitely overstayed its welcome. That should have been done after 3, and 4 I thought was absolute miss. 5 was a little bit funnier, but yeah, it's getting to the point where
I didn't go past 4 because it just started to bore me a little bit. Our Flag Means Death, I watched the first season. It was sweet. It was a little funny, but I've heard a lot of great things about Reservation Dogs, and I really want to get on that.
Yeah, Reservation Dogs, I heavily recommend. Of all the projects that he's done recently, I still think What We Do in the Shadows is number 1. But as far as all the TV projects he's done, Reservation Dogs, like it's so spectacular. What him and Sterling
For the
Harjo.
Wilder People also highly recommend. I'm sure you've watched it.
Have not actually seen that one. No.
Oh, it's a very good. Like I think that's one where all the humor works for the tone of the movie, and it's just
And Jojo Rabbit made my top 5 of 2019. I love that movie. Just absolutely loved it. Which again was a movie that I did not know what to expect going in, because again, a lot of people were not a fan of it. I think that the people who didn't like that movie, they just didn't like the fact that he was just making a comedy about Nazis, and he didn't make Nazis like the straight up bad guys. I think that's why they were mad at him about that, if I had to guess, because to me, there wasn't a single thing about that movie that didn't not work. Like everything about that movie just worked perfectly.
Jojo Rabbit's a great movie. I don't like most people who I've talked to liked it. I understand why it put some people off, but in terms of being offensive, like it seems like a lot of people embraced it. Like I'm Jewish and I really like the movie.
It won the Academy Award, and got nominated for Best Picture. So clearly people liked it.
Yeah, I feel like there were a few polarized reviews, but it's most like it won the TIFF Audience Award. It was nominated for Best Picture.
Right.
Like it was mostly a huge embrace. I have friends who say it's one of their favorite movies, some of whom are also Jewish. So yeah, it's mostly people loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would tend to agree. So as far as next goal wins goes, what would you give it out of 5?
I'd honestly give it 4 out of 5.
Nice. That's really refreshing to hear, honestly. Yeah, I will have to get back to you and let you know once I finish watching it. Because like I said, I was excited to see this movie, and I did want to give it a fair chance and a fair swing, regardless of what the critics said. So I do plan on watching it. What's it called? Gal, dude. But again, we did an hour and a half, but again, we had a lot to talk about, but again, we crushed it. You crushed it. Absolute blast having you on. Thanks for coming on. Hopefully, again, I want to have you back on, dude. Absolutely. This is great. We got 5 more episodes before the end of the year. Next week, we're doing Wish and Napoleon. And the week after that, I'm teaming up with Kristen. We're covering Eileen, May, December, and we're going to talk about Saltburn that week when it gets its wide release. Then the weekend after that, Dustin and I, we got another big content drop the second weekend of December. We got Poor Things, Zone of Interest, American Fiction, Boy and the Heron, and one or two other things that I'm currently forgetting. Then our last two episodes, we got Wonka and Anyone But You as the penultimate episode, and the finale. So I'm actually going to reveal this now on the show for anybody watching. So the finale, we're going to do a little bit something different last year. So last year, if you guys will remember, around this time last year, we did a two-part finale where I did one episode that was really just two full-length podcast episodes, but I called it a part 1 and part 2 finale, where the first one, I talked about Babylon with Nathaniel Ahart, and then the second part, I talked about Glass Onion with Chris. It was one of the last episodes that Chris was on in 2022, and this year, what I decided to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different, a little bit more ambitious. I'm going to be doing 4 different mini live stream podcast episodes in the week between Christmas. In the week leading up to Christmas, which will be our finale. One episode will be Aquaman. One episode will be Rebel Moon. One episode will be Maestro, and one episode will be the Iron Claw. What's it called? And I may throw Ferrari in there. So the plan right now is to have 4 different mini episodes that will be released in the week leading up to Christmas, and then it will be edited into 1 hour and a half, however long it ends up being, podcast episode covering all of those movies, and then that will be the finale of the year before we come back in January for our 6th season. So, Gull, any of those episodes that you would like to hop on, by all means, you are welcome to.
Amazing.
Like I said, we only have 5 episodes left before the end of the year, but we've got a lot of stuff still to cover. So we will definitely have spots for you if you want to come back on for any of them.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Yeah. What's it called? So yeah, feel free to plug any sites that you're on. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Okay, so I have my Instagram, which is Film Toppings, one word. Film as in films, toppings like pizza toppings, and it's one word, as I said. You could find me in the same ways on YouTube, as well as Film Fanatics Pod on Instagram, which is me and my friend Alan's podcast. And we postponed our beginning of our 4th season a bit, but we will be back very soon. So stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I will definitely be looking at potentially a guest spot on that podcast coming up soon. But
okay, sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on. Like I said, one for you, one for me as far as that all goes. Yeah. And as usual, guys, you can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin' TV podcast on all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, X. TikTok. I just love saying you got to put like the emphasis behind it. Let's call it. Subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow, Monday. And as always, people, again, I hope you have a very happy, very warm, Thanksgiving. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week for Wish and Napoleon.